The heavy bag swayed violently as Muhammad Ali's gloves connected with thunderous precision. But Larry Holmes wasn't watching the punches. His eyes were fixed on something else entirely. Something that would haunt him for decades and change everything he thought he knew about the greatest boxer who ever lived. It was 1978, and Holmes had just been promoted to Ali's primary sparring partner at the legendary 5th Street Gym in Miami Beach. The humid Florida air hung thick with sweat and ambition as young fighters from around the world gathered to witness the master at work. But what Holmes observed during those intimate training sessions would remain buried in his memory until now. "People always ask me about sparring with Ali," Holmes would later reflect, his weathered hands tracing the rim of his coffee cup in his Easton, Pennsylvania home. "They want to hear about his speed, his footwork, his trash talk. But they never ask about what happened before we even touched gloves." The detail Holmes noticed wasn't in the ring. It wasn't during the famous rope-a-dope demonstrations or the lightning-fast combinations that made Ali legendary. It was during the warm-up routine in those quiet moments when the cameras weren't rolling and the crowds weren't watching. Every morning at exactly 6:30, Ali would arrive at the gym carrying a small leather notebook. Not unusual for a fighter to keep training notes, but Ali's ritual was different. He would sit alone in the corner, writing furiously for exactly 15 minutes before anyone else arrived. Holmes, who had a habit of showing up early to get extra work in, began noticing a pattern. The man who claimed he could float like a butterfly and sting like a bee was actually documenting something, Holmes remembered. But it wasn't training routines or fight strategies. I caught glimpses of it once when he left the notebook open. It was filled with names, dates, and what looked like apologies. The notebook contained a secret that Ali had been carrying since his conversion to Islam and his stance against the Vietnam War. In those pages, he was writing letters he would never send, to the families of soldiers who had died while he was stripped of his boxing license, to the young men who had been drafted in his place, to the communities that had turned against him during the most controversial period of his career. Holmes discovered this during their 3rd week of training together. Ali had stepped away to take a phone call from his manager, leaving the notebook open on the bench. The page was dated March 15, 1978, and began with the words, "To the mother of James Patterson, age 19, killed in action near Da Nang while I was fighting for my right to refuse to fight." I realized in that moment that the man everyone saw as supremely confident, maybe even arrogant, was carrying a weight that none of us understood, Holmes said. He wasn't just training to get back in shape or to prove he was still the greatest. He was training to earn something back that he felt he had lost. Not his title, but his peace of mind. The revelation changed how Holmes approached their sparring sessions. He began to understand that Ali's famous pre-fight psychological warfare wasn't just about intimidating opponents. It was about drowning out the voices in his own head. The constant talking, the poetry, the predictions. They were all shields protecting a man who questioned every day whether his principles had cost other people their lives. During one particularly intense sparring session, Holmes noticed Ali's rhythm was off. His timing, usually impeccable, seemed fractured. Between rounds, Ali sat heavily on his stool, staring at his hands. "You all right, champ?" Holmes asked, breaking the unspoken rule about not interrupting Ali's mental preparation. Ali looked up, and for a moment the mask slipped completely. "Larry, you ever wonder if doing the right thing can still make you wrong?" It was the most vulnerable Holmes had ever seen the 3-time heavyweight champion. The question hung in the air like the humidity that perpetually filled the Miami gym. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think about this untold side of Muhammad Ali's story. What other secrets do you think boxing legends have kept hidden from the public eye? That notebook became like a ritual for him. Holmes continued. "Every morning, same corner, same 15 minutes. I started to understand that his warm-up wasn't just physical. It was emotional preparation for carrying the weight of being Muhammad Ali." The training camp continued, but Holmes began seeing everything differently. Ali's famous rope-a-dope wasn't just a boxing strategy. It was a metaphor for how he had learned to absorb punishment while conserving energy for what really mattered. His ability to take hits and keep moving forward had been developed long before he ever stepped into a ring with Joe Frazier or George Foreman. One morning, Holmes arrived to find Ali already in the ring, shadowboxing with unusual intensity. But he wasn't throwing punches at an imaginary opponent. He was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. "I'm sorry, Mama," Allie whispered between combinations. "I know you raised me to serve my country, but I had to serve my conscience instead." Holmes realized Ali was talking to his mother, Odessa Clay, who had passed away 2 years earlier. The notebook wasn't just about the war. It was about everyone he felt he had disappointed along the way. The thing about Ali that people don't understand, Holmes reflected, is that his greatest fights weren't against Frazier or Foreman. They were against his own doubts. Every morning in that gym, he was fighting to prove to himself that he had made the right choices. As their training progressed, Holmes began to see patterns in Ali's behavior that made sense only in the context of that notebook. The way Ali would pause mid-sentence during interviews, as if remembering something painful. The way he would sometimes stare out the window of the gym, lost in thought. The way he would insist on paying for everyone's meals after training, as if he was trying to balance some cosmic ledger. One day, I asked him directly about the notebook, Holmes remembered. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "Larry, when you stand for something, you don't just carry your own weight. You carry the weight of everyone who couldn't stand with you, and everyone who stood against you. That notebook helps me remember that both groups deserve my respect." The insight changed Holmes's entire perspective on what it meant to be a champion. It wasn't just about winning fights. It was about winning them while carrying the responsibility of being a symbol for millions of people who saw their own struggles reflected in your victories and defeats. During their final week of training together, Ali did something unexpected. He tore a page from his notebook and handed it to Holmes. "This one's for you," Ali said simply. The page contained a single paragraph. "To Larry Holmes, who will carry this torch when I can no longer hold it. Remember that being the greatest isn't about being perfect. It's about being perfectly human while the whole world is watching." Holmes kept that page for 45 years, never showing it to anyone until now. "People always want to know what made Ali special," he said. "They think it was his speed or his mouth or his ability to take punishment. But what made him truly great was his ability to carry the weight of his choices without letting it break him." The notebook disappeared after Ali's retirement, and Holmes never knew what happened to it. Some say Ali burned it in a private ceremony. Others believe it was buried with him. But Holmes thinks the truth is simpler. Ali didn't need it anymore because he had finally forgiven himself. "The last time I saw him, maybe 10 years before he passed, his hands were shaking from the Parkinson's, but his eyes were clear," Holmes remembered. "I asked him if he ever regretted his choices. He smiled that old Ali smile and said, 'Larry, I learned that you can't float like a butterfly if you're carrying the weight of the world. Sometimes you have to set it down to fly.'" The revelation of Ali's secret notebook adds a new dimension to his legacy. It shows that behind the bravado and the poetry was a man wrestling with the same doubts and regrets that haunt anyone who has ever had to choose between what's easy and what's right. Holmes's story reminds us that true greatness isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and moving forward anyway. It's about carrying the weight of your choices while still finding the strength to inspire others to make their own difficult decisions. That's what people need to understand about Muhammad Ali, Holmes concluded. He wasn't just the greatest boxer of all time. He was the greatest human being I ever knew, precisely because he never stopped questioning whether he was good enough to deserve that title. If this story moved you the way it moved me, smash that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear about the hidden struggles behind greatness. What other untold stories do you think exist behind the legends we admire? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss these incredible revelations about the icons who shaped our world.